Cheers, Stuart. Just a couple more dropping in.
I'll get me no comments sorted now, this year.
I think that's everyone. Just another couple. All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for tuning in. Once again, I'd like to thank Stuart Monk from Soccer Profile for arranging these series of Q&As. This is a part of our partnership with the Middlesbrough Youth League Player Development Programme. So today, we have Ryan Maye, Head of Coach Development at Aston Villa, which I know that Stuart regarded as one of the best coach developers in the UK. So I'm sure it'll be a very insightful evening for all of us participating. We have received a lot of questions through the email. We'll work through those first, and then we'll open it up to the floor. If you've got a question, could you please send it through to me on the chat, and then I'll work through those in order after we've done all the ones that came through on email. So, yeah, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ryan. Ryan, thank you very much for coming on. It's much appreciated.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, and I'll start. Could we just please make sure everyone has their microphones muted, please? Okay, so I'll start off, Ryan. Could you just please give us a bit of an insight into your coaching journey and provide us with a brief background on the various roles, your various roles within professional football? Sorry, Ryan, your microphone is muted.
That's because you muted everybody, wasn't it?
Yeah, sorry, my fault.
That was the best introduction I've ever done as well, Chris.
Apologies.
Right, so I've probably first started, my first job was at Chelsea Football Club in 2002. So I sort of graduated from university with a sports coaching degree and started in my first full-time job there. It was quite an eclectic job. It was definitely sort of there to sort of hone my adaptability, really, because I was doing women's and girls. I was doing boys' centre of excellence. I was doing development centres. I was a football development officer within the footballing community, which included things from inclusion to disability to school-based stuff to after-school clubs, you name it, 24/7, sort of on the grass. So it was very much a bit of a furnace and of learning, really. I stayed there happily for sort of 4 years, and I got the opportunity to head a little bit further north to Scotland, where I spent 2 years at Glasgow Rangers. Again, it was a fantastic role for me. It was a senior development officer's job, which basically had international, domestic, as well as academy and recruitment sort of aspects to the role. So again, nice and varied. And I think back then the roles were really good because you didn't just do one thing. And that's what I feel now within sort of the elite player performance pathway that academies sit within now. There's an abundance of jobs, but everyone does sort of things that are unique to them. So they're singular roles. And I think I was really fortunate to sort of come into the game at a time when you got your hands dirty across lots of different things. You know, you drove minibus, you wash kit, you sort of work with the under sevens and you work with the 18s and you work with the 23s. You just had that vicarious experience across all the phases, which I definitely think sort of helped me. So after those sort of two years at sunny Scotland up in Rangers, I moved down to the Midlands at West Bromwich Albion and started sort of my association with that football club, which sort of went on for a number of years and a number of guises. That was starting off as a coaching and workforce manager, which was probably a very early precursor to a coach developer. And then obviously that sort of evolved into sort of an academy role. So I was happily there sort of full time for 4 years. The technical director at the time was a gentleman called Dan Ashworth. Dan sort of moved to the Football Association as sort of the technical director, and an opportunity arose to go and work in a new role within coach education, which was a bit of a forefront, or striving towards what potentially coach development looks like a little bit now. And it was providing bespoke in situ support into the professional game. So going into the clubs, rather than the club's coaches coming to you, I would go in and provide that in situ support on a weekly basis in the clubs themselves. So that was a fantastic experience. Spent sort of 4 years at the FA. Bit of a cycle here, isn't it? Every 4 years I tend to have a change. But yeah, so I spent 4 years with the FA. Had the great opportunity as well to shadow some national camps and work on those. One of my clubs whilst I was at the FA was West Brom. So I was providing them with some of that bespoke in situ coach education within that sort of professional game sphere. So although I'd left, I've never really left. I just wore a different tracksuit. And at that time, the Premier League had started to try and initiate with some funding streams around trying to implement full-time heads of coaching in every sort of academy and football club in the country. So West Brom looked at the opportunity to try and entice me back as coming as their first head of coaching, which I snapped at because, listen, it felt like home. It was a club that I'd always enjoyed working at. I knew the players, I knew the staff really, really well. So it was a no-brainer for me. Again, so I went back. There was 3 years that we spent, and like in most things in football, sometimes things change politically in and around the places, and the opportunity arose to go to Aston Villa. So my current boss, Mark Harrison, was the academy manager at West Brom, and was very influential in bringing me back to West Brom's head of coaching. He became obviously the academy director at Aston Villa, and obviously when that happened, he wanted me to go with him and sort of start the new project there, which is where I currently find myself 18 months in.
Brilliant. So just to follow on from that then, Ran, what does the role of head of coach development entail?
It's a really good question, whoever's asked that. It'll be very different and unique to each environment that the clubs have. So some heads of coaching will be very much grass-based. They will be pretty much coaching most of their time as well, and they'll sort of be in control of curriculums and probably line managed staff. I think you've then got people that would be heads of coaching and coach development, which do a little bit of the curriculum stuff. They'll manage the staff, but they'll also be accountable for the development of the staff and their sort of competencies to improve them. And then you've got heads of coach development, which in some clubs is people that have got no football background. So I know Southampton, for example, have got a gentleman from cricket who's very, very good, who sort of knows the academic underpinning of pedagogy and bits and pieces to underpin that elements for the coach's development from that perspective. I probably put myself in that middle camp. I think I'm more of a head of coaching and coach development. You know, I have the tacit knowledge of the game, but also have the sort of academic underpinning of hopefully trying to understand how we sort of develop people and how people understand how to develop themselves. So on a day-to-day basis, I'm very fortunate. I line manage the staff all the way through from 9s to 23s. Aston Villa, we've got a full-time coaching model, which means we've got a full-time member of staff at every age group from 9s all the way through. So it's brilliant. I've got the best job in football because I get to work with players, work with the coaches, and pick and choose when and where I do it. So it's a fantastic job, really rewarding job. I sort of try and describe it as a bit like a grandparent. You get all the nice bits every so often. You can hand them back at the end of the day. You don't have to deal with the parental headaches of being in charge of a squad.
Good. Thanks, Ran. One of our academy coaches, Stevie's going to ask question number 3. Stevie, would you unmute your microphone, please?
Yep, no problem. Thanks, Chris. How you doing, Ray? Good to talk to you.
Thank you.
How do you ensure that your academy's coaching program is delivered consistently throughout all 3 development phases and align with your playing and coaching philosophy at your academy?
It's again another very, very good question. What's the best way to describe? So I'm very lucky that I've managed to work within football clubs that have a sporting director principle. So it's very much a sort of a top down and a bottom up approach. So there's that golden thread that's aligned all the way through. And I think when you've got hierarchical people that want to pull that in the same direction, then obviously trying to align your philosophy is easier because you're implementing a football club framework. Where I think people might have greater challenges is if each of the phases or the first team management stuff, there's no, if you like, singular belief system or a framework put in place. We have a thing called a DNA. So I suppose it's your game style, it's your way of playing, it's your sort of teaching the game beliefs, really. And it's built off 6 strands, 3 in possession, 3 out of possession. So everything we do is aligned from 9 through to 23 is around those 6 strands. Now, a lot of people might look at curriculums and sometimes think you can have curriculums that are quite tight and restrictive, and it's almost like, I want you to coach this and when. Or you've got really quite loose curriculums where coaches just plan off the cuff on a weekly basis. We're very much potentially towards that left-hand side, that tight aspect. But the reason why we call it a DNA and the way I try and describe it to people is it's not cloning. So I don't want coaches to come in and have to copy and paste stuff just because we think it works around our curriculum. It's DNA in the truest sense of the word, in the fact that if 2 parents come together, they'll get an offspring that's got both of their DNAs. Now, over time, you can track your heritage and your lineage. So our DNA gets plugged in with coaching staff. It's got the academy philosophy, if you like, the underpinning. And obviously then you've got the players and their personalities to bring it in. So when you mix all those unique things together, that's how the DNA evolves. Now, my challenge is to make sure that with that evolution, the golden threads are still evident. So making sure we've got clarity around those golden threads linked to those 6 strands of the way we play is the challenge that we've got to do. And I suppose how we do that is partly off that full-time model. We've got accountability at every age group. And when you've got very fortunate to have full-time staff in the building, it's a lot easier to communicate. It's a lot easier to line. It's a lot easier to get people having their voice and choice and stay on board because they feel they own it as well. So I don't have to do a lot of the driving. It's the coaches that drive it forward because they've got that belief set and they've got that buy-in because they feel that they're part of it and that they own it as well. So that's probably, I suppose, the underpinning foundation stones of how we try to do that. Is it easy? No, you'll always have bumps in the road, but that's development. That's an elite performance environment. It shouldn't be easy. You know, it should be difficult. You should have tough conversations every so often. You should be able to push and check and challenge each other because that's how we get better. And if we ever got to the point that it was a nice, easy road of alignment, then I'd be slightly worried that something was going wrong.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Ray.
Okay, Academy Manager Michael O'Kane is up for the next question. Michael, do you unmute your microphone, please?
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Hey, Ryan. How are you?
Good evening.
Ryan, how do you use data analytics to help aid your coach's performance and development?
Good question. Could I ask you to define what you would sort of define as data analytics?
Well, you're basically your data analysis. You know, how does that aid help? You know, if you're doing a data analysis on a coach, how does that aid their performance and development?
That's perfect. Just so I've got an understanding of what your analysis definition is. That's perfect. So we do a lot of that, and that's probably the reason why I asked to sort of clarify it, because I don't want to confuse the situation with some of the stuff that we do, because I'm a huge believer in data. So we produce lots of complex data for coaches to help them to do 2 things. If you don't understand yourself well enough, then I'm not too sure that I can help direct, support and guide you to where you want to be. So a massive thing around understanding yourself and understanding your coaching brand is huge. And then obviously understanding then how your tools of your trade, so your knowledge, your communication, your observational skills, how will they then interlink back in? So what we do is we try and track all of those key areas with data. So we utilize a thing called heat mapping. So like you get with Prozone and players, you can get a heat map of where they've gone, what passes they've made, what interactions they've had with the game, how far they've run. So all of that data gets churned out. And we try and do the same for coaches. So we are very fortunate that I have a full-time coach development analyst that works with me. And what we produce together is a whole set of communication heat maps. So in training and game, I map and code the coach's communication to a very, very in-depth level. So it will be a case of the types of interventions they use when they're stoppages, the type of in-action coaching interventions that they use, the flavor around it. Is it positive, specific, positive, negative? Is it general, specific, generative, general, negative? Is there corrective feedback? The types of questions that they ask, are they open, are they closed? The frequency of who they're speaking to. Are they talking to individuals, units, or teams? How are they talking to them? That sort of when the ball stopped, so to speak, what are we doing with the stoppages? Is it task reviews? Is it debriefs? Is it connection activities? So we code all of that so that the coach will get that heat map given to them so they can get an insight into how they utilize their biggest tool. We have also that in a match day. Again, all of those things are underpinning it, but also this time, because it's a match, they'll start to see who they talk to more often. How do they start a game? Are they quite vocal at the start of a game in the first period or the first half? Does that decrease? Do local derbies have an increase? Do they get sort of emotionally hijacked with their communication if we're playing a derby or when they go behind? So we track and we give them the data how their coach behaviours are when we're winning, when they're losing, when they're drawing. So they're immersed with data around their own coach behaviours and how their communication influences the players. We also give them data and sort of, I suppose, clip them around how they utilise psychology. So we work off of sort of the Loughborough 5C model. And we'll work with the psychologist, and the psychologist will code how they're utilising and empowering those 5Cs. We'll start to look at the types of language they use, whether or not it's got psychological sort of power words and bits and pieces, or whether or not it's technically and tactically dominant. And we're also starting this year to utilise the coach's second biggest tool, which is what they look at, and we're starting to track what they're looking at. So we've got sort of a little partnership going with the university, and we're using some eye tracking software, and we're starting to sort of give the coaches the data on how often they're looking on, around and away from the ball, what they're looking at, and then obviously then me as a coach developer can interact with them and start to, I suppose, poke and prod and start to see whether they're looking at the right things or whether or not they can start to amend what they're looking at and why they're looking to try and affect certain things. So with regards data, you've asked the right man and the right question, because I love it, because I think most of that data isn't there to say there's a right and a wrong way. For me, with all the coaches, and I say this to all of them, because whenever they sit down with me, the first question is always, are you happy with my map? And my answer is, well, I'm not bothered. It's whether you are. Does it fit your brand? Is there any areas on there that surprise you? Is there any areas that have become sort of blind spots because you're not aware of them? Over time, does the data start to show patterns and trends around any biases that you might have around certain preferences of communication and intervention styles that you might have? So it gives me the opportunity for them to say, well, listen, whatever that data provides you, it should give you some insight. It should make you inquisitive. And like most feedback and reflection, it should then influence the next set of future planning and how we go in and work to affect certain things with the players.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. Good insight into how data, maybe some coaches maybe mightn't want they're scrutinized as much, but I think that's a good idea.
So Ryan, follow on from that then. Are there any other methods you utilize in helping your coaches achieve their goals?
Yeah, I suppose part of the biggest thing, if you're working with players or you're working with anyone around sort of support and guidance, is about the relationships that you build. So we try to work off of an 80-20 rule around formal and informal feedback. So 80% of my time with the coaches will be informal. And I've probably got different types of informal support that we'll give them. So I sort of, two easiest ways to describe it. I've got informal that's attached and I've got informal that's detached. The informal work that's attached is me alongside you. I'm working with you. I'm in and around the session. We might be coaching as a sort of a coaching pair, and I'll sort of try and get some learning through osmosis, or I'm there to check and challenge and sort of work with you and alongside you. So that relationship becomes tighter. The other aspects of the informal stuff is the detached piece. That's when I'm floating around with my iPad and I'm observing, I'm looking, I'm listening, and I'm making notes more so for me, so that over a period of time, I can track, I suppose, trends and patterns that I'm seeing within the coaches and what they're working on, especially around their own individual development action plans. And over that time, those two pieces of informal stuff will be sort of continually moved forward with just lots of ongoing professional discussion. So, you know, we'll have a pre-COVID, you can have a chat at lunchtime in the canteen or around the coffee sort of machine. You know, my door's always open. They come and perch on the desk. I might pop into their offices and just have general football chats that continue to, I suppose, be the oil that greases the wheel, so to speak, with regards to all of that informal stuff. And then that 20% is the formal aspects. So it's the tangible feedback that you'll give them, which is almost like at strategic points of the year, drawing a line in the sand. And those bits are important because obviously we're all accountable to hierarchical structures, and every chairman that I've ever worked for wants to know what he's getting for his money and what return on investments he's having. And is that money that he's putting in benefiting by us developing future and better players? So those formal opportunities give me the opportunity to, I suppose, measure and evidence distance travelled, so to speak, so that I can then sort of produce reports that basically prove that what I'm trying to do is working.
Thanks, Ran. Jeff McGee, you've got the next question.
Yep. Hi, Ran. So, Ran, specific to match day situations, how do you support and measure the performance and development of your coaching staff?
So obviously I've sort of indicated that we'll track their communications, get some data around how their coach behaviours have worked. Again, it will follow the theme around whether it's an informal or a formal support mechanism around a match day. So am I working with them? Am I working near them? So I'm just observing bits and pieces. And it's like most things. How can I support them? Well, I need to have an understanding of what's in their mindset. I need to understand what the learning objectives for the boys are. I need to understand where that links into players' individualised learning plans. Is there anything that the coach is specifically working on around their development action plan that links to maybe a game or a tactical sort of scenario and situation? So I try and, I suppose, if you ascertain all the landscape of the context that might be important, and then if you like, that's the battle plan that gets drawn up, and then I can go in and best support those individual coaches at that specific piece of time. If it's a day when I'm very much detached and I'm not really hovering over them, and I'm more looking at it from a head of coaching perspective around, you know, is our DNA evident, other players developing, then it might just be some very informal feedback and clips that I might produce after the game, linked to our game style and linked to our curriculum and linked to our DNA. So again, match days are very, very important, but what they'll get done, and every coach will get through our coach development scheme, is cuddled with information that they can then utilise as they deem fit. So we'll give them on a wash of information that over a period of time they can pick and choose where it plugs in. Sometimes they'll miss it and they might get 4 or 5 weeks of that information. It doesn't quite make sense. But then, like with players, you get that penny drop moment, don't you? When suddenly all the things have just come together and they get the light bulb. I get it now. Fantastic. So we just keep providing that feedback. We keep the support going. And like I say, the best way to describe it is we cuddle them with information every time we go in.
Okay, thank you.
Michael O'Kane, you unmute your microphone, please.
Dead on, Chris. Thank you. Brian, communication is a vital skill set in your role. What different methods do you use utilising and providing feedback to your coaches?
I think my biggest communication tool is the ability to listen, because I want to let coaches be the ones that the voice is probably more predominant than mine. Being present, I think, is also very important. So I see lots of coach developers, especially from the many years that I spent being an FA tutor, that the most important thought or the most important opinion was theirs. And they would listen to a coach, but actually they would just be waiting for the opportunity to get their 2 pence worth in and tell them actually what the coach should be doing or how they should do it. So making sure I'm present when I'm listening and making sure that, again, I'm trying to relate it back to the wants and needs of the coach. And I think once I've done those aspects, I've got the ability then to communicate on a level that's appropriate. And I suppose what I then try and think about with my communication is the amount of energy that I have to invest in that conversation. And it's all linked back to relationship pieces. So I have a very sort of, well, I've got 4 areas of sort of relationship that I define in my mind of potentially how I got to walk into to communicate with people. And those 4 areas are defined as, the first one's a parasite. And although that sounds quite a nasty type insect, it basically is the fact that I know when I walk in that coach is going to rinse me. They're going to live off of me. They're going to want to drain me of everything they can get from me. And they're not necessarily invested in it being sort of a 2-way communication piece. They just want to grasp everything they can and they'll suck it out of you, which takes a certain way of communicating if you're going to achieve effectiveness from that type of relationship. The second one that I define is around the thing called service level provider. So it's a little bit like if your broadband's not working, you'll ring up the person on the other end of the phone. They want to make you happy by you walking away knowing that you've got your broadband working or you got it at a cheaper price, and you want to get that same outcome. So there's a mutual area, but actually there's nothing invested, anything of trying to get to know you as a person, trying to unpack the surface. It's just very much a very superficial, a clear outcome that needs to be achieved. And if you get it and I get it right, we walk away happy. The other area of relationship that I try and define is one of professionalism. So that's when you invest a little bit more time. You'll probably know a little bit about the coach. You'll have some underpinning background to them. So again, how I then choose to sort of communicate with that aspect is there's a bit of a vested interest. They'll sort of play that conversational role with you as well. They'll be interested in little bits that you want to say. And I often find that that's quite a really productive relationship around communication within football clubs. And I suppose the last layer for me is family. And that's where that you really know the person. There's an element of attachment built. And obviously you can sort of fall out of them as well as sort of have nice, happy times with them. But those conversations sometimes are a little bit tougher. And those often form over a long period of time. If I've had a coach that I've worked with over a number of years, we potentially have moved into those family areas. So when it becomes the challenging conversations and potentially some difficult questions that you have to ask, although people might see family as a really beneficial relationship to have, it actually becomes quite difficult to have tough conversations. So for me, that professional relationship is one that communication becomes quite easy. And I suppose the last thing I always try to be is I try to be authentic. I say listen, I don't have all the answers. I definitely don't have any copyright on all the questions. So I'm not the person that's going to be able to fix everything or tell you and make it magic. My role in communication for me and helping self-development for the coaches is around being a catalyst. I'm going to try and, speed it up where I can. And at times, especially with young coaches, I might have to slow it down a little bit. But being authentic so that they don't think that I'm the font of all the answers that they need to have, and they might have to search and seek other people that can also help them. I think that's been a big sort of valuable key in the communication that we have in order to make it productive.
Thanks very much, Ryan.
Another one of our academy coaches, Michael Woods, has a couple of questions. Michael, will you unmute, please?
All right, Ryan.
Evening.
There is going to be times when coaches have a difference of opinion to yours. How do you look to manage that within your role?
Well, I suppose it goes a little bit back to what we just started to talk about. It depends on the context of whether or not there's a definitive right or wrong. So, say for example, we one of our philosophies will be around we'll play with the back 4 as a developmental tool in 11-sided football. So we won't necessarily play with the back 3 within our philosophy and framework. So if a coach is wanting to play with the back 3, then the opinion will be that mine's the power vote, if that makes sense, because it's the alignment of the football club and things we buy into. If it's around their coach development, well, it's about their voice and choice. And it's about whether or not they are asking the question to try and seek approval, whether they're asking a question to try and ascertain whether or not there is right and wrong. Are they trying to ascertain it that they are probably not believing in the way that we want to do something? So therefore, what I'm trying to do all the time when I have that is not listen to the story. I'm trying to listen for the story, if that makes sense. I'm trying to read between the lines as to potentially where we're going to go with this conversation. Why is it sort of being asked that way? So that if I can ascertain all of those bits, it's a lot easier to navigate the right and the wrong, so to speak. Because ultimately within football, it's all opinions, isn't it? So what we've got to do is we can't have that sort of Brian Clough mentality of we'll have a conversation, at the end of it we'll agree I'm right, because we're not living in a dictatorship really. It's very much like I said about the DNA, it's evolutionary. So as long as potentially we can always come back to the agreement of that golden strand, then it's a healthy debate. My opinion is not right all of the time. It's not right most of the time, especially at home. So it's just all the time having lots of conversations, trying to ascertain what the underpinning context and rationale is behind the opinions in the first place, and then just trying to unpack it that way. They're often complex, but I think if you get your framework piece right, you get people that buy into your concept, then those conversations often can resolve themselves quite quickly, because most of the time we end up talking about the same thing, we just use different words. And when we start to listen to each other and sort of translate it and relate it back to that sort of core framework of the football club, it's very easy to get over those conversations and move forwards.
And what attributes do you look for when hiring coaches to work in your academy environment?
Good question. It's difficult, isn't it? Because a lot of the time you look for things that you probably value in yourself. And I know over a long period of time, I would have employed coaches that probably display traits and behaviours that I find beneficial, that link to me. So a stupid work ethic, being quite obsessive around the game. They've got a fantastic bubbly personality. They've got lots of energy. They energise aspects. I never want a coach to come in and it be about them. I want coaches to come in and coach players, not sessions. And ultimately, I want them to be selfish but selfless. They've got to be selfish in the fact that they know that there's got to be, in order to achieve it, you've got to make sacrifices, both for themselves and for the players. So we've got to drive things forward, but they should always be putting the players first. So lots of those different types of characteristics will display in many different ways with coaches that come through the door. But I suppose in essence, they're the bits that I hold true to me, that I feel are important. And again, the biggest one for me is I want coaches to be authentic. I want them to understand who they are, what their brand is, what they bring to the table, and how they can add value.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Stevie Moore, would you unmute your microphone, please?
It's not unmuting. There we go. Can you hear me now, Ryan? Sorry.
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
No problem. Ryan, you're head of coach development, and you look over the development of other coaches. How's your own personal development monitored?
I don't try and look at things to be monitored. So coach development, I say to all the coaches two things. I'm never going to chase you to do it. You're not forced to do it, because ultimately I believe that the game will find you out if you're not someone that continually wants to learn and get better and evolve. So I'm never going to bash anyone over the head of having to do something. And because I don't put those mechanisms in place, then my employers don't. When the board asked me to sort of, I suppose, define what success would be for me in my role, my KPI is to make myself redundant. And a lot of people think that's probably quite a strange thing to do. And when I first said it, I thought, what are you saying? Crikey, you need to backtrack a little bit here quite quickly. And I basically said, listen, if we're successful, I want people to ask two questions of the coaches. It would be, the first question is, do you need Ryan anymore? And if we've got the coach development framework right around development action plans and coaches being able to stand on their own 2 feet around, understand how they develop themselves and how they become lifelong learners, then I've done my job. I believe I put the right mechanisms in place and developed the right sort of competencies and motivated the coaches along the right way, provided the right support, the right guidance for them to not need me anymore. The second question I want you to ask, so I can stay in a job and keep paying me mortgage, is, do you want Ryan? Because if the answer to that one's yes, then I know that we've made that step towards people seeing value in people, about what they can add value to. So with regards how I then try and portray those values as well, is I'm on a course called EHOC, which is the Elite Heads of Coaching, run by the Premier League. And it's a sort of a 4-year course, which I think towards the back end of it, we'll end up having, I think, some sort of master's degree through Portsmouth University. So that's an ongoing aspect that I'm sort of dovetailed into over the next, well, come to the end of it, it'd be sort of starting next year that I think we'll graduate from it. But that then gets lived and breathed into our sort of competency framework, because one thing I'm always keen on is I don't necessarily value things around if you're getting better at something, so about skill. So every year coaches will assess themselves on competency. And every year that I was an FA YCD working for the FA within other clubs, I saw lots of sort of, I suppose, developmental models that every time they sat down with their line manager or their boss, it would always be almost like an impression management discussion. So how do you think you've got on this year would be the question that's asked. Yeah, I think I've done well. I've done this and I've done that, and I'm definitely better. The problem with that is if you continually try and prove that you're getting better, you're chasing things too quickly. And I think sometimes you can miss the value, which is around the experience. So when our coaches start to, I suppose, reflect on distance traveled, I don't ask them to score whether or not they think they've got better at something or whether they think they've got worse, neither way. So if you have a competency within our framework, I want them to value it and measure it and evidence it against the amount of time spent undertaking it. Because I'm a big believer, I'm yet to meet a very experienced practitioner who at worst is just good at their job. Someone that's often got a lot of craft and experience of doing their trade and normally very, very and highly proficient in what they do. It's because they've spent time investing in it. They've spent time in the reflection piece. They've spent time learning from the bits that they've got wrong and also understanding the bits that they got right. So everything that we do with regards monitoring is self-monitoring. Invest time in the experience, which is what I try to do with the EHOC bits and pieces, and anything that I go and ask of the club to maybe support me on will be based around new experiential development. So looking at the areas that I think I need to go and add some experience to, and asking the club to support me with time, potentially with money or both, in order to try and facilitate the areas that I've identified, but not to get better at them, to gain more experience in them. And a byproduct should exist over time.
That's brilliant, Ryan. Thank you.
Okay, Michael O'Kane, please unmute.
Thanks, Chris. Ryan, in your experience, what would you say are the key considerations around someone looking to develop coaches in terms of maybe their own set skills, things they would need to work on before venturing down that path?
Crikey. That's a really tough question. Looking in the mirror time now, isn't it? I think a big aspect of being a good coach developer is having a strong skill set around emotional intelligence, the ability to have a good situational awareness within an environment and a context. Because the way I always look at it is I'm a guest when I'm doing my job, because I'm stepping into your world to support you in where you want to go. So I'm a guest and I should only be there by invite. If I force myself upon you, then I'm not too sure that's the relationship of a good coach developer. So I suppose those key considerations for me would be is how comfortable are you in being a guest and sort of trying to provide support when you're invited to give it, recognize when you can sort of push a little bit more, recognize when you have to come off. And that's that situational awareness type piece. I think you've got to have a thick skin, purely and simply because a lot of the time, and I say this to all the coaches, and it's something I sort of developed after about a year of doing it. When I first started the head of coaching job, I was deemed as their mentor within the football club. And that title never sat well with me because for me, a mentor should be chosen. And the coaches didn't choose me, the football club did. So I was forced upon them. And that's the bit that I suppose shapes the bits that I've just said around. I've tried to be a guest, and I always give the coaches this opportunity of a get out. You don't have to have me. The framework that we put in place at Aston Villa is the only thing that you have to adhere to. If there's anyone at any point in time that you feel better suits your development, better suits your support, then feel free for them to be the person that you define as your coach developer to support you. Because it's about the person. It's about them having voice and choice. It's about them having the direction over it. So I think if you're comfortable in that and you can understand that you're going to be that catalyst, then I think potentially coach development is a route that you can go down. I think having lived the role as a tutor and looked and worked through qualifications, I think the two jobs are very, very different. Because when I was a tutor for the FA delivering A licenses and pro licenses, I got to the point of my job is there to get someone to an end point with regards to sign off on a bit of paper. Again, goes back to that relationship piece. They wasn't necessarily invested in wanting to get better. They were wanting to showcase what they needed to in order to get that bit of power that I held over them, which was the yes. So I was, if you like, forced upon them again, but I had a hold over them. As a coach developer, I don't want to have a hold over any of my coaches. I want them to have the hold over themselves and have that direction that they choose to be. So I suppose those motivations, I think, are very key questions for someone that potentially wants to go in and work as a coach developer.
That's great, Ryan. Thank you. Thanks
question.
very much for that. Yep, perfect. Absolutely.
Okay. I'm going to move on to some of the questions that have been sent through on the chat. If anybody else has one, just shoot it through to me, and I'm going to work through these in order. So, Jonathan Walters, do you want to unmute your microphone, Jonathan, and ask your question?
Hi, Ryan.
Hi, Jonathan.
Yeah, I'm just looking to get your thoughts on clubs closing their academies, and is it the idea they've lost their value in inverted commas? So what are your thoughts on clubs closing academies?
I find it always difficult to talk about other football clubs because it's tough. But I suppose my first feeling is it's quite sad, because I think that academies are very vibrant, enriching environments for young players to develop. They're not all going to make it as football players, but the experiences that they'll gain over those period of time, the friendships that they'll make, how it shapes them as a person as well as a player, I think are very, very valuable. So if those opportunities are taken away, then I find it quite sad. It's like most things, though. Everything has to come down to a return on investment. And ultimately, if something isn't providing you with the productivity of what you can afford and what you can invest, then I suppose difficult decisions have to be made. There's always potential ways of trying to work smarter. And I know that teams like Brentford and bits and pieces have come up with a very different sort of unique model, and they're making it work. I know Birmingham came out with recently about potentially looking at a B team type structure and not having sort of an academy further down. I think it's Bayern Munich that have stopped their sort of foundation phase, so to speak. So they're only starting to bring players in at the age of 12. As long as it's unique to them and it works for them, then I think fair play, crack on. People, I think, also need to have a little bit of a memory around what the old Charter for Quality used to look like. So the schoolboy forms that I would have grown up in and bits and pieces, you only signed your schoolboy form at 14. So actually, if you like, professional formalised football started at that age. Everything before that, you were in your grassroots teams, you're playing for your district, you're playing for your county, you're playing for a local club side or a representative side. So I suppose really it's just the landscape of what exists in that part of the world. Is it an overly competitive market? In Birmingham, for example, where we're based, we've got 3 Category 1s putting in significant investment. So that's 3 big fish trying to live in the same pond of the players that you're fighting for. So the likes of a Walsall and a Burton, who are sort of Category 3, how do they survive? and the money that they invest, the chairman think, crikey, what's the point? Let's just scrap the 9s to 16s and let's live off whatever gets kicked out of the big 3 clubs that are putting all the money in further down the line. I think it just has to be unique to your situation. And I don't think there's a right and a wrong, and I would never judge a club for not having one. I just think it would be sad because I think it's a wonderful environment that boys can mix with.
Thanks, Ryan.
Jimmy Phillip sent the next question through. Jimmy, you'd like to unmute the microphone, please?
Hi, Ryan. Thanks for everything tonight. It's been good listening to some of the stuff. I know you mentioned motivation a little bit earlier on. Just on that, especially, it's more relevant to now, really. How do you motivate coaching staff throughout challenging times or even like changes within the club?
Yeah, well, especially at the minute, people find it very difficult because coaching via a computer is not really coaching, is it? I suppose it goes back to being available. So a lot of the time, the coaches know that, listen, if you're feeling sort of down or you need to talk about some stuff, then you know where I am. I suppose lots of times we want to talk a bit about football. So we've created lots of CPD and CCF tasks, almost like a coffee club type mentality where just regularly we'll just get together and just talk nonsense about football and try and replicate the office environment that we would do on the down times. I think we've been quite fortunate with lockdown in the fact that there's been a lot of free-to-air games. So we're immersed with football to the point that actually I'm getting quite fatigued with the number of live games because I get obsessed with watching them and I feel a little bit punch drunk, especially on Saturdays now. You've got like 3 games back to back from sort of pretty much 12 o'clock through to sort of 9 o'clock. I'm solidly just watching football. So it's making sure that the coaches don't fall out of love with the football piece because of the tough times and the challenges that we've got. During the time when we're in on the season, I've never yet come across a coach that's in a full-time or part-time capacity within an academy that isn't motivated to want to be there. I know that scenario is different at different levels that you work, but I've always been of the belief set that I don't actually have a job. I've got a hobby that I get paid for, and every day I can get up and do a hobby that I love and I enjoy. And for the last 22 years, someone keeps putting money in my bank. So I'm quite fortunate and very humbled that people will keep giving me those opportunities to work with good players.
Perfect. Thanks,
Ryan. Phil Melville from the Irish FA sent one through. He can't come on to ask you, Ryan. He's on the McDonald's coaching awards at the minute. But he said, do you have in-house service days? Do you lead these sessions or are they coaches led?
A mix of both. So there'll be some of me, some of them. Some will be linked to technical DNA type curriculum. Some will be linked to player-centered development. Some bits we'll look at that, say, for example, a coach in and around his development action plans might have been researching or developing himself in a certain area and he'll sort of present back because it might add value to other members of staff. So probably once every 6 weeks, there'll be a formal type of CPD where people get together. We have it multidisciplinary as well. So the psychology team, the sports science team, the player welfare team, the recruitment team, the coaching team, we'll all do sort of, I suppose, whole club CPD aspects as well. So I suppose we're really quite fortunate with that in the fact that there'll be a lot of people that will pick up the mantle, so to speak, and run with the torch and deliver bits and pieces. So listen, I get bored of my own voice sometimes, so I know the staff do. So I definitely wouldn't want to be at the front of the room leading everything all of the time.
Perfect. Is there anybody else who'd like to ask a question?
They're all bored of my voice as well.
No.
Chris, do you mind if sorry.
Sorry,
I'm trying to,
yeah.
no worries. Listen, Rand, this has been fantastic. In terms of grassroots football volunteers, what would be the best advice you would give to someone in a role like yourself, or well, none of us in a role like yourself, to be fair, but what advice would you give to clubs trying to do something similar over here? What aspects should they be looking for? You've obviously maybe answered most of that in terms of the coaches must clearly want to do it in the first place, but if the coach does want to do it, what would be the best advice in a grassroots level?
I suppose it's understanding that when people come to your environment, it'll probably be the sort of, maybe if it's a player, it's the fifth person that's tried to talk to them and teach them during that day. If you're a coach, you've had a full day's graft at work. So I suppose it's providing clarity about how much you want to achieve and how long it's going to take you to achieve it. I think a lot of people try and bite off too much and try and achieve too many things. And obviously they put themselves under quite a bit of stress, especially when the coaching bit might very well be voluntary and part-time. So it's just, I suppose the biggest piece of advice I can give is, listen, set clear goals of what you want to achieve, have some, I suppose, reality of smart targets of making sure that they're measurable and achievable, and put a sensible time frame within it. And I think if you've got those ingredients and there's motivation on both sides of the people who are supporting the coach and the coach themselves, some fantastic things can happen. But a lot of the time I just find people set too big a goals, or they just give themselves too much pressure really to achieve things. And therefore, when they start to try and get under a bit of pressure, things fall by the wayside. And it's a little bit like with exercise, isn't it? Yeah. Once you fall off the wagon, it's very difficult to get back on it if you haven't done it for a while.
Yeah, and then obviously then you talked about you're massively into your data, and you know, how do you calculate do you concentrate, obviously, when you're doing that? Do you record the session, obviously the matches, and then when you're doing that, you just watch that yourself and calculate that yourself, or is there a system you use? Or
yeah, we're very fortunate. Like I said, I've got a full-time development analyst called Ollie. Ollie's my godsend, so he sort of produces a lot of the data. So I'm in a sort of fortunate position now. I used to do the capturing myself because I wasn't that fortunate at West Brom to have one, so I had to clip it myself. But we use a system called Sports Code, which isn't cheap. It's $2,000 a year as a license. But what that enables us to do is set up little code windows that, as the footage is sort of under play, and I can clip. So it's a command coaching, the ball stopped, he's speaking to an individual, it's corrective feedback that he's get type stuff. So literally, I'm just coding every incident as they work through. Is that achievable at grassroots? 100%. Again, it's just providing what's the most important things you want to collect. And even just simple hand notation, tally charts and bits and pieces are very easy to do. In the past, I've got parents to do it. So if they're looking at their son, they can just almost like bullseye their son and just have a very simple chart of how many times he's been spoken to, what type of information is he been given. So there's lots and lots of different ways that you can collect data very informally. And then it's just basically trying to make it visual enough that people find it useful.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And then is the coaches mic'd? Are the coaches mic'd up for that, or?
Yes, no, they're all mic'd. So every single time a coach walks on the grass, training or match day, if there's a camera that's filming it, then it's mic'd. So we collect the footage. I also encourage
everyone is.
Yeah, so every time that we go out, say for example, there's 3 age groups on the AstroTurf, two out of the 3 will be sort of mic'd, purely and simply because of frequencies and the cameras. The third frequency, it just gets a little bit scratchy because you've got the sort of radio waves that are competed. But yeah, so 2 out of every 3 sessions are coded. The same with the match day on the weekend, 2 out of the 3 are done. What I've started to try and do as well is get a backlog of sessions. So if you've got an iPhone, you've got a voice recorder, and you can buy a lapel mic from Amazon for $5.99, plug it in, literally record it. And then what we can do is we can stitch the 2 together later.
Yeah.
So that's what we're now starting to do to try and capture that third one. It's easily affordable. I said the lapel mic, if anyone's got an iPhone, they can start to capture and record their sort of communication. What I encourage coaches to do as well is to commentate, because one thing I often find with reflection is when you're looking back detached from the session and you're not emotionally intuitive to be linked to it anymore, you'll see stuff that you wasn't seeing in the game or the training session. So we pick up everything. Listen, every one of my coaches is like Jose Mourinho when we're watching it back on a video. They miss nothing. They know everything, right? But that's not what we're seeing and feeling when we're on the grass. So when they're mic'd up, I get them to try and say, listen, they almost like talking to themselves, so I know what's in their head. And when they watch it back, they're thinking, was I really thinking that at that point in time? Crikey, I should have been looking over there. I should have been thinking about this. So say, for example, if I'm working, I'll give the example of, well, I'm thinking about making an intervention now with Ryan. He's not really opened his shoulders. He's not checked. That's twice. Third time, yeah, he definitely needs me to support him on his body shape. So now I know what I'm talking through. I know what I was then thinking at that point in time when I watch it back, if that makes sense.
No,
So
yeah,
it just enables the coaches to have a better understanding of what was running through their mind, because our brain's brilliant to make us think that we were thinking completely different things at the point in time.
Fantastic. No, thank you very much, Aaron. Thank you.
Any other questions? No.
I've got off lightly.
I have one, Ran. We've implemented Soccer Profile into our academy here. And I've seen from their website, you endorsed that platform and you implemented it into West Brom.
Yes.
What is it you like about the platform? Or
I think one of the fantastic things about a platform is children at any age are competitive. And I suppose what the platform does is it allows you to try and beat your score. So there's elements of internal sort of drivers that help you try and beat your previous score. So I was a young man that was brought up on the FA sort of Coca-Cola Soccer Schools Awards, where you had your sort of 6-star concept. And every time you wanted to try and beat your previous score so that you could get a quicker, faster time on your turns, a quicker way that you could run with the ball. So it's that internal motive that keep you sort of striving. You can also then compare and contrast against others. And of course, you want to be better than your mate. You want to be better than the fella down the road. So again, it's just that constant, I suppose, driver to try and do some homework practices, really. So back in the day, people wouldn't be on PlayStations. Culture was a bit different, but you'd be out on the park practicing a lot more. And I think what Soccer Profile does is it reignites some of those old habits around developing a self-practice culture and methodology and mentality in individuals to try and keep driving you forward to get better, to measure yourself, to push yourself, to keep striving towards it. And again, it just tunes into their world of technology, isn't it? And apps and being easily accessible to things very, very quickly. And it's just a fantastic visual.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So look, we'll wrap it up. I'd like to thank Ran for giving up his time to provide us with a great insight into his role and responsibilities at Aston Villa. Another big thank you to Stuart from Soccer Profile for arranging the Q&A. Our next Q&A will be the 4th of March. That will be with Tony Studerick, who's the former Manchester United and current Wales national team head of performance. So look, thank you all for taking part tonight, and hopefully look forward to seeing you all in the next one. Thank you. And again, Ran, thanks very much. Much appreciated.
No, thank you for inviting us. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, everyone.
Cheers, guys. Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers, Ran. Thank you.
See you, Ollie.
Yeah, mate. Well done, guys. Fantastic again. Well done.
That was brilliant. Right, I've already had quite a few texts coming back today. Enjoy that. Great insight. Can we get him back on? So I wish my luck already. I don't know, maybe not.
No, listen,
that's brilliant. That was great insight. That was really good.
Really good. Really good.